Good morning, Americans. This is your favorite alien. Here on the morning of Saturday, June 11th, 2022, the Belmont Stakes. Okay. But I wanted to tell you something interesting. Coming up next week on Sunday is your latest federal holiday, Juneteenth. That's June 19th. And it'll be celebrated on Monday because it's on the weekend. The problem is next year Congress has to decide whether it's in the federal holiday bill of 1968, which moves it to a permanent Monday, or whether it's going to be like July 4th or Veterans Day, which no matter what day it is, it's still not a Monday holiday bill. But Congress has to decide that next year. So this year, Juneteenth falls on a Sunday, and Monday is going to be the federal holiday, so banks will be closed, Fed will be closed, and no mail, I'm assuming. And today's comment is on Juneteenth. Juneteenth is for June 19th, 1865, when Union General Granger issued his famous General Order Number 3, stating that all slaves in the state of Texas were now free. Okay? And why did he do that? Well, this is what you Americans were never taught in school, and you should have been. When President Lincoln did the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863, like it says, Emancipation Proclamation. A president does two things, and they act almost the same: a proclamation and an executive order. And yes, some people consider proclamations executive orders, but the problem is proclamations are ceremonial. Executive orders, like Executive Order 9066, for instance, with the internment of the Japanese camps, issued on February 19, 1942 by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, that had teeth. And let me get you the Emancipation Proclamation for you African Americans and the rest of you Americans and explain it, okay? On September 1862, President Lincoln was between a rock and a hard place. Because starting in April of 1861, the Union has taken loss after loss, and I mean big losses. And the last one was just a month before, when they suffered humiliating defeat at Antietam in Maryland. Okay. So he was under a rock and a hard place because he was losing the war. And he was losing the public support for the war. This is what they don't teach you in high school, Americans, or in your education. 1862, the president was like Franklin Delano Roosevelt would have been on December 7th, 1941, in a rock and a hard place. Or especially December 11th, 1941, when Italy and Germany declared war on him, and he's fighting a two-front war. Well, he's fighting a big, and he doesn't have, because remember his Pacific Fleet got destroyed. Well, that's the same thing that happened with President Lincoln. His Army of the Potomac was getting decimated. He wasn't doing anything except for Mr. Ulysses Grant over in the West. But Ulysses Grant still had a few months to go to actually get noticed, because Vicksburg would fall in the latter half of 1862. And, you got all kinds of fun stuff there. Yeah. But he needed something to... because if, here it is, September 1862... and he's looking at the Confederate States of America. Okay. So he invites his cabinet, and they have a big session. Think of it as the his version of the Cuban Missile Crisis there. And the cabinet's telling him they won't fly. Congress won't let this fly. Issuing that proclamation it has no teeth to it. You can't enforce it. Congress can't enforce it. And the Supreme Court may turn it down. And there was a heavy debate about this. Finally, he left without having, one way or another, any decision on their problem there. So on December 31st, he tells this cabinet that on January 1st, the next day, he is going to issue it. And he did, to all publications around. And they published it on January 1st, 1863. That was just a proclamation. It's like it has no number. Proclamations have no numbers, okay? Executive orders didn't have a number till like Abraham Lincoln. He's the first one that numbered them. Before that, executive orders had no numbers either. And the executive orders and proclamations were kind of tied to each other, so they didn't have much teeth. It had to be the Supreme Court to interpret them. Well, after this proclamation here, the Supreme Court didn't want to take its sides on this one, and neither did Congress. So it stood. And everybody assumed that because President Lincoln had said that that was an executive order, it was a proclamation, and those are ceremonial mostly. So it had no teeth to it as far as freeing the slaves. But it did do something spectacular. It changed the way the people looked at the war on the North. And with Grant's starting to win, 1863, especially after the Gettysburg battle on July 1st through the 4th, it was, a change of attitude for the North. So everybody assumed that when Lee surrendered at Appomattox on April 12, 1865, that the slaves were freed. No, they were not. And you had some issues to deal with that, too, that you didn't deal with. And nobody ever taught you this in high school. You had 4 states: Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and Delaware. Delaware, remember? Joe Biden State, Delaware. Yoo-hoo, Delaware! Who had slaves. And there were slave states that didn't succeed from the Union. Yoo-hoo! So they still had slaves. Now, the Supreme Court took the tack that, okay, I'm going to stay out of this fray. They didn't challenge the Emancipation Proclamation. And when General Gordon Granger, he was taking troops as Reconstruction started after April 1865, so he was taking troops to the state of Texas under federal control now. He got there on June 18th. On June 19th, he issued General Order Number 3, which stated that all slaves in the state of Texas are herefore hence free. His general order had teeth because it came from an army occupying general. Think of him like Douglas MacArthur was in Japan. The Emperor! Yeah, okay? And that's what he was. And thus, that's why African Americans celebrate Juneteenth, because that's the first official day that they actually consider themselves free in the state of Texas only. And this happened in Galveston, Texas. And the first celebration of that was the next year, 1866. Now, in 1868, Congress and the states ratified the 13th Amendment, which outlawed slavery and any type of servitude unless you had a criminal offense and you were dealt with the criminal judiciary Therefore, you were in servitude. Hence, chain gangs. Okay? You understand what I mean, Americans? The 13th Amendment allowed for chain gangs because of that, and it still does. People that work on your roads, that's part of the 13th Amendment. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay. That passed in December 1865. In 1868, they passed the 14th Amendment, which guaranteed due process under the law, and that citizens are considered of the United States, whether naturalized or born here, are citizens of the United States. Okay? And this is where you get the impression that, oh yeah, that wipes out the Dred Scott decision. Well, no. It's just the, how would you say, legislative answer to the judiciary's Dred Scott decision. Who is the last resort of this? The U.S. Supreme Court, which issued the Dred Scott decision. And it's funny because they have a right to nullify an amendment if they want to. They didn't touch that one either. It was a tough time for them at that time. Then you had, in 1870, the 15th Amendment, guaranteeing everybody, including the African Americans, the right to vote. Now, mind you, the 13th, 14th, and 15th were passed as political retributions for the South by the radical Republicans. You understand me, African Americans? And that's why they put all these clauses on the 14th, to give the Supreme Court latitudes on how to water it down. If you read the 14th Amendment and you read the clauses, you'll notice that the Supreme Court interpret those clauses different ways. There's two different ways of interpreting, up or down. So after 1870, the new president that started in 1869, Ulysses S. Grant, found himself in trouble because he valued military control, and he thought that he could control the government like he did the military during the Civil War, and he found out that's not the case. Because he went all out on the KKK and wiped them out because they were killing African Americans left and right. If you had Juneteenth, they used to hang you on the tree or burn you at the stake for celebrating Juneteenth. And President Ulysses S. Grant was your savior because he saved all that. But in 1872, he found out that he was in trouble because he had passed the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871, and by 1872, the Ku Klux Klan were almost dead because he really acted big time and got rid of them. The African Americans were having their first taste of freedom, really, from 1872 to 77. But poor Ulysses S. Grant, when he ran his second term, found that he was rock in a hard place. He couldn't do anything. And that eventually, Reconstruction had to be ended. So he had to end it before he left. The last troops left in January 1877. And in 1877, because of the election of 1876, the Republicans came to the Democrats, the Redeemers in the South, and gave back the South. And the South took a vengeance on the African Americans for all the years that they were having fun over there. Because remember, there was nothing humane about this Civil War and the outcome of it. It was all political. And the outcome, you showed it on the 1876 election and the backroom deal that they did, giving Rutherford B. Hayes the presidency and the South to the Democrats. And the South immediately went to work on Jim Crow laws and also getting the people they needed at the U.S. Supreme Court, because they're going to need it to do these Jim Crow laws so that they didn't get turned down. And they did. Starting in 1880, they started doing law after law, and the Supreme Court starting looking at the 14th Amendment. Hey, the due clause under the due process clause, we can water it down so that we can have a South that actually doesn't have slavery, but doesn't have African Americans in power either. So they started watering down that 14th Amendment to 1896 when they finally declared Plessy versus Ferguson, okay, and separate but equal, because they couldn't denigrate the African American, but he was not quite equal to the whites. So that's what they said, separate but equal segregation. And as the whites came north, segregation came north with them, because the Supreme Court had already approved Plessy versus Ferguson and had reaffirmed the Dred Scott decision in there. And Juneteenth, a lot of African Americans got killed between a period of 1880 to, I would say, 1949, either lynched, outright hung, or killed, burned in their houses because of celebrations of Juneteenth, especially in the South states of Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia. Yeah. Because in the Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia, especially Alabama with George Wallace and Georgia with Lester Maddox, yes, I mean, that was segregation big time. And those were two very much segregationist figures. A lot of African Americans died under their watch. And therefore, you had to revisit the civil rights that you supposedly got in 1865, 68, and 70, and you had to revisit them in 1965, a century later. Ain't that dumb? But you did. And when you got your segregation rights overturned with that, finally, and the Board of Education, Brown versus the Board of Education in 1854, which the Supreme Court early in the 20th century under Teddy Roosevelt's administration started to look the other way on the 14th. And instead of watering it down, they started to water it up to what the Congress had originally passed under the Radical Republicans of 1868 to mean what they wanted, a punishment for the South. And that's what they got, a punishment for the South. And Mr. Lyndon Johnson, unlike his predecessor 100 years before, Andrew Johnson, who wanted to water down the 14th, he wanted to stick it to the South on the 14th. So the two Johnsons had very opposing views on the 14th Amendment. Therefore, you African Americans that are listening to this, now you understand where you're standing today. Because nothing was accomplished for you. It was all political. It was all political in 1965. It was all political in 1865. Because nobody, even today, has bothered how to integrate you into the United States government and the United States society. What is it to be an American? It means that you can look at a person and see an American, don't see an African American, because you got that slash. A Latin American, an Asian American. They don't have that yet. Therefore, one of the respects of Juneteenth, and President Biden politically did this because it was politically correct for him to do after he won the presidency, because he needed something to keep the African Americans on his side. And he did. So Congress passed there. The Republicans didn't bother to change that. You notice there was only one Republican in the Senate that actually opposed, a few in the House. And why did he change his mind? Because probably they told him, hey, the radical Republicans are no longer around. We can't substantiate you going against us. So it passed last year, very close to Juneteenth. So there was nothing done for Juneteenth at all last year because it passed within a few days of Juneteenth. Before that, there was no chance of the federal government to reinstate this. So today, This year, it's the first year of a federal holiday of the National Independence Day. Juneteenth is what it's called. Okay? And this is one of the reasons why this holiday means something not only for the African Americans, but it should mean something for all the other ones, especially the whites, Latins, and Asians, Muslims, and Christians. You have to get together. What you have here is something that has not been resolved. You created another holiday because you needed to notify the people that you haven't resolved these problems. Creating a holiday doesn't do it. You have to sit down and say, I may have a different color, but I'm still American, I'm still a human. And forget about the colors. Is it going to be easy? No, it's going to take at least 2, maybe 4 generations to get this done. And the idea is not to instill the hatred and the divisions that you have to your descendants, either if you're black, white, yellow, red, whatever you are. And that's hard to do. Are you willing to do this? I don't think so. I haven't seen a single pigmentation person, whether it's black, white, Asian, Latin, that wants to sit down and talk this out. What do you mean I got to give up my being black? And I don't mean giving up black. I mean giving up that you are black. You are a human. You come ancestry from Africa. How you got there, nobody knows. Why you're Caucasian? Well, nobody knows. Why you're Asian looking and why you're Latin looking. Why you got slanted eyes? Well, nobody knows. See what I mean? And they're all supposed to have been humans coming out of Africa. How did we get so different? Were we really coming out from Africa or were we from somebody else? Nobody knows. That's a question you have to answer. It belongs in the same question as, is there a supreme being? Yes or no? I can say yes, you can say no, and we'll both be right. Or we'll both be wrong. See what I mean? You don't know because you don't have the answer to it. You don't have the answer to this. But you definitely got to get an answer to why you are American and why you should be American and human. This is your favorite alien with today's commentary. Good day.